Alright, so in this Neuroanatomy video, we are going to be talking about the cerebral cortex. Let's get started. Alright, so cerebral cortex is right over here in the cerebrum, up here. So the cerebellum and the brain stem are down over here, and over up top we have our cerebral cortex. So I'm going to be explaining the lobes all over your cerebrum part of the brain. So let's get started. First, we're going to divide it up into parts. So I'm going to divide the brain up how it is. Alright, so in reality, this is how your brain essentially looks from a lateral view. Now over here we have this area all over here is your frontal lobe. Now your frontal lobe is associated with your memory, remembering important stuff. It's all in the frontal lobe, in the front of your brain. So right over here, your frontal lobe in the front of your brain, you're going to have memory, you have speaking. So muscle contraction, the mouth, speaking happens in your frontal lobe. Now I'm going to go over the functions in a separate slide. So let's just go over the physical parts. So continuing on with the physical parts of your brain, we have the temporal lobe. Now the temporal lobe is right over here. So this area over here is your temporal lobe. Now your temporal lobe is associated with your auditory system, learning stuff, so remembering. It's a huge part of remembering. Learning stuff. Actually, this entire region of the brain over here is associated with learning and remembering, sort of like motor skills almost. So it's like learning, auditory, stuff like that. Now we're gonna go to the occipital lobe over here. This area over here is your occipital lobe. So we'll go over here. Now the occipital lobe is basically your vision. It's basically just vision. So everything you see is from the occipital lobe. Now the occipital lobe it's not really like how you see, it's mainly vision perception. So like when you see something, recognizing something you saw earlier, or recognizing a person you saw walk into the room earlier, or something like that. So that's the occipital lobe. Now we're on our last section, which is up over here. The parietal lobe. Now the parietal lobe is all about language, remembering languages, learning languages. As I said, this entire region over here is associated with learning and remembering. So again, parietal lobe is right over here. So basically learning and remembering. Now let's go over some of the functions I talked about now that we have all the parts down. Let's start with the frontal lobe. This is a recap. So the frontal lobe is associated with speech, and memory. Let's go to I'm going to go to the temporal lobe. Now the temporal lobe is associated with auditory system and learning. Now let's go over to the occipital lobe. This is associated with vision and vision perception. Now let's go over to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe, as we talked about, is associated with language. So essentially remembering your languages is all associated with the parietal lobe. So hopefully this video is helpful, and yeah, it's the cerebral cortex.